Welcome along to the top 10 of the worst units in late antiquity. Here we are. I'm making my list up. I've been doing some top 10s of the best units. I've covered the High Middle Ages. I've done two lists there because we had some DLCs, so I did an updated top 10. I've also done a top 10 for LA as well, which you can check out if you want to. And now I'm doing some of the worst units. And I think I did one list for the worst units in High Middle Ages. And this is the second one I'm doing. And it's for LA. And we are going to start looking at the Byzantine 551 list. This is quite an interesting list because this sort of typifies really what I'm talking about when I talk about the worst units. They're not absolute worst units in the game, but I think you definitely got a question value for money. That's the main issue for most of the units in my top 10 here for the worst units. And this list is a good example of that, because one of the main criticisms by the better players and gamers in general, players in general, is that even though we've got some great units here, the Byzantine list, it's just very, very expensive. Your better units, veteran Byzantine Lancers 72, the expert armoured horse archers 66, armoured noble lancers 64, and then dismounted armoured noble lancers 72, and even some of the light horse archers 48 for nomad light horse archer, because it's the fierce variety. Byzantine lancers, well, they're actually pretty good value for money, but the armored horse archers 52 again. A lot of units are just quite expensive. And for my top 10, I'm going to start off with the armored noble lancers. And let's zoom in. It's interesting, isn't it, to zoom in? Usually when I'm playing, or even when I'm doing my army list analysis, I'm concentrating more on the army, really, rather than the units in particular. So it's quite nice when I do the top 10. I'm really just talking about this unit. So that's nice. It's also interesting that these units look better. These are the noble lancers. Look at these wonderful shields. And yet our armoured noble lancers don't have any shields. And even the Byzantine lancers, they've got small shields. So they look actually the most boring. And they're the most expensive. They're at 64. This is the dismountable version. Most of the other versions are just standard cav. But I'm still going to start with them at number 10, because they are just fairly expensive. Now, it's not to say that they're not great on the battlefield. Certainly, sometimes they can turn battles. They're armoured, and they're superior quality lancers. So that's a great combination. So maybe, a couple of them perhaps. But it's just when you start looking at the unit and comparing it to the cheaper lancers that it's really, and some lists as well, they might not have the variety on offer here. Byzantine list, that is 1+. We got tons of options, but some armies you only really get the armored noble lancers. And if you compare the noble lancers, they're only 48. That's a huge difference there. 16-point difference. And what are you paying for? Yes, quality. So we've got our superior quality. But the noble lancers are also superior quality. So they both get their plus 50 for quality in the POA. And then the armor, as I've said before, armor is generally not that cost effective in the game. The way the game's designed, it seems to be about numbers and also about quality. So quality counts, as I've said, in melee, but also counts in impact phase, whereas armor just counts in the melee phase. And even then, when we consider that, the armor is plus 50. It's plus 50 in the POA, where you get plus 12 for the Noble Lancers for armor. They've got protected, so they get plus 12. So you're talking about not much difference. Not much difference. 38. It's just 38 up. Equal on quality, and then the Armoured Noble Lancers have got the 38 advantage for the armour. But when you add it all up, I mean, just in terms of numbers and how much it all costs, 5 of these units would be 320 points. 320 points, where you could get 6 of these units for 288 points. So you get 1 more unit and you save 32 points for 6 of them compared to 5 of those. So what would I rather have? Would I rather have 5 of the Armoured Noble Lancers or 6 of the Noble Lancers with 32 points spare? Probably I'd have to go with the Noble Lancers, to be honest. You get 1 extra unit and 32 points. So they really aren't that cost effective. It has to be said. I guess it doesn't matter so much in this list. We've got a ton of Noble Lancers. We've got Byzantine Lancers, which are also good value for money because they're 54 above average and they're armoured. But overall, I think going in at number 10 are the Armoured Noble Lancers. At number 9 on my list, I'm going for the Sassanid Foot Swordsman unit. Swordsman units tend to struggle in LA because you have more cavalry. Elephants are very strong in LA. Any of the half decent infantry units, Roman legionnaires, the warbands, other impact troops like the zealots, the Pictish spear, they're just going to struggle. Dismounted lancers, they're not going to hold against those kind of units. There are 110 down against warband on impact, 150 against the Roman legionnaires and the zealots. In melee, they're down against most units. The Pictish spear, they're down 38. Legionnaires are down 75 in melee. The zealots are down 38. And even against the Scots Foot, which are one of the worst infantry units in this period, they're only up 12, and 12 is just not a lot, really. So overall, they don't do very well against most units. But having said all of that, it's not like I'm going to say, you know, that we should adjust the stats or make them cheaper or something, because in this kind of army, the Sassanid 477 list, they are very much a supporting unit. You've got some great units like the expert armoured horse archers. You can take 6 elephants if you want. Cataphracts you have, massed archers, skirmishers, and some cheap infantry. So it's all a mix, really. And so these are very much supporting troops, and then they can do quite well. So yeah, they're not absolutely terrible, but when you do compare them against other infantry units and units that they're going to tend to come up against in the period, they don't do so well. But I guess all you can do is hope that they can hold a few turns, and then your better units will come into play. So I think about number 9 is the right rank for this type of unit. At number 8, and number 8 on my list, the Praetorian Guards. They've got great stats, they look wonderful, add something different to the game. Not so many of these kind of really elite units. But at the price 87, that is quite expensive, and I find that quite a lot of the expensive units in the game are overpriced, and this is probably definitely one of them. If you compare them against your Legionnaires, they're only 25 up on quality. Their quality is 75, Legionnaires is 50, and armor is the same, 50 and 50. So they're only 25 up, and yet they cost 87. Now, I'm not saying that the price should come down for this unit, because if you look at this, this is the Roman 197 list in LA. And it is a great list. You've got at 1600 points, you've got up to 10 Legionnaires you can take out. You've got the medium foot, which is armored, which is excellent. And one of the most cost-effective units in the game, I would say, would be the mediocre Roman Legionnaires, because they're only 54, and yet they're impact foot, heavy foot, armored as well. So they are great value for money. So overall, this list is great. And this is kind of really the finishing touch to it, really. So I wouldn't bring the price down, but if you just compare them one-on-one, I think they are very expensive. Now, one thing I would say is that in my tests, I didn't do a load of tests, but I did a few, and they were disrupting one or two Roman Legionnaires. I put them up against Legionnaires just to see how that plus 25 would work out, because in a lot of my videos and what I usually say is when you're only around 20-25 up, it's not much. It's pretty close to evens in POA terms, but still plus 25, it does give you an advantage, and they were disrupting one or two of these units on impact, so yeah, it's still an advantage. I guess what you can do with them is just use them as your kind of leading hammer, really lead them, get them into action against the enemy as soon as you can, and there's not going to be much, if anything, that's going to beat it, infantry wise anyway. They are the absolute best of the period. If I compare to, say, if we think about units in medieval, we've got the dismounted knights, and they're wonderful. I mean, for me, they're more, and I did put, I think, the dismounted knights on my original top 10 list for medieval. I put them at number 1. Now, the reason being was I think they do better in medieval than probably these units, and they're just that much less. I mean, they're only 78, so they're 9 points less than this unit, and yet they still smash through most infantry units, and they're fully armored as well. So they're actually the same price as Legionnaires, but I think they do a little bit better than Legionnaires, so that's why they go in pretty highly on my top 10 list for best units of the period. But for this unit, 87, that is a lot. So it goes in at number 8 on my list. At number 7 on my list, I'm going to go for the Boudouin Foot. Boudouin Foot, same price as standard heavy infantry of the period, which is the big negative, really. If you look, this is the Arab Bedouin 300 AD list, and if you compare to Arab City, with Arab City you get a few of the Bedou foot, but you also get your Arab foot, which is bona fide heavy foot. So this is the big disadvantage for this kind of list. We basically don't have any heavy infantry. We've just got skirmishers and medium foot. So okay, in this kind of map there's patches of rough ground, that's good. So on some maps it might be advantage to you to have medium foot, but it's always good to have a mix, really. So with that Arab city army, you've got a fair number of Boudouin Foot plus your standard heavy infantry for the open ground. So, and there's not even that much difference with cavalry and stuff. I mean, with the Arab city, you still get a load of the Boudou Cav and the Boudou light horse. So it's a real disadvantage for this kind of list to have no heavy foot, and the price as well is the same. So they're not really that great for the price. Light spear swordsman, same as Arab foot, Sassanid foot, units like that. So I think justifiably they go in as one of the worst units. Maybe if the price is slightly cheaper, 34 something perhaps. Yeah, in classical you have a lot of the medium foot, but there is a difference in price because the medium foot is what? It's about 42 in the Greek armies, Thracians and so on. But when you're paying the same price as a standard heavy foot unit, yeah, it's got to go down as one of the worst units at number 7. Going in at number 6, we return to the Byzantine list, and I'm going to go for the Byzantine Flankers. A great name, but I would say that they are pretty expensive and not very cost effective. 48 for light horse, really expensive, double what you pay for javelin horse, not that much less than Byzantine lancers. Yeah, they're only 6 more and they're above average armoured lancers. So 48 for light horse, well equipped light horse archers, that's really expensive. And there's another type as well, the fierce nomad light horse archers, which are the same price, and the difference is the Byzantine flankers are above average, some armour, and the fierce nomad light horse archers are superior unprotected. As I've said many times, basically quality is better than armour in this game in almost all facets, apart from perhaps missile fire. But you know, once you talk about melee phase and cohesion checks and so on, it's quality all the way. And so that's why I'd always lean towards maybe the unit with better quality over armor. So yeah, these Byzantine flankers, above average quality to some armor, they're really expensive and just not worth money. I mean, even in the Arab list, you've got light lancers. I think they're about what, 36 or so, and these are really just glorified horse archers. So light horse archers as that. I mean, even the great Turkoman Cav are 36, aren't they? And they're proper cavalry. So yeah, very expensive, and justifiably they go in at number 6. And we stay with the poor old Byzantine list because at number 5 I'm going to go for the Leggio Comitatensis. They look great, don't they? Some of the units in this army are really fantastic to look at next to the dismounted noble lancers. So 51, pretty expensive when you look at their performance on the battlefields against other infantry. So Warband, they're 110 down against Warband. That's a heck of a lot. But then they do go to 12 up, which is much better. But then against your standard infantry of the period, you know, the swordsman units, the Sassanid Foot, Boudouin Foot, Arab Foot, those kind of units, they're evens on impact and they are only 12 up. And you know, This is a unit that costs 51. All those units are 36. It's 15 points difference, and yet you're only 12 up. Once you get to 10, 12, 20, yeah, it's not much of an advantage at all in POA terms. So 12 up for a unit that costs 51. Really expensive. And against dismounted noble lancers, which are only 3 more, don't cost that much more, and yet they're 50 down on impact and 88 down in melee. So there's a huge difference there, and yet the points difference isn't that much. So they're not great value for money, has to be said. Okay, they do much better against cavalry, so they really and I think historically they were meant to be more of a anti-cav unit, and you do get tons of cav on this in this period, so in that sense they could be quite useful because of the bow and the darts and the light spear. They get that advantage against enemy cav, and in my experience when I've seen them in action, they've actually done quite well against cavalry. So okay, that's a plus, but in terms of their cost and how they do against other enemy infantry, pretty poorly, it has to be said. So they go in at number 5. At number 4, I'm going to go for the Cataphracts. I think they're quite a popular unit. We like to play with them. We like to play against them. They look good on the battlefield. But for the price, 68, and their performance, it's just a bit underwhelming. It's a bit underwhelming. You do wonder if there are going to be some little adjustments. I know Knights, I think, have just been buffed a little bit in medieval. Let's see what happens with these units. When you look at the stats, okay, against infantry they tend to do quite well, but even the impact against Arab foot, Boudouin foot, Sassanid foot, very average infantry. They're only 50 up on impact, but then in melee they do go to 150, so that is a plus. But impact is not great. Pictish spear, they're evens on impact, and then they're 100 up in melee. And then they just sort of struggle against a lot of cavalry, really. I mean, noble cav and veteran armoured cav, they're only 50 up in melee, 50 up on impact as well. So it's not the greatest. Boudouin cav is pretty cheap. They're only 50 up on impact against Boudouin cav because they're light lancers, and then they go to 100 up in melee. So when you're paying 68 for this kind of unit, sometimes they get stuck against infantry, don't get the disruptions on impact a lot of the time against a lot of units, because actually all those units I've just mentioned on impact, they're only 50 up, although all those infantry units was 50 up, and those cavalry units that I mentioned, they're 50 up. Okay, other cav, they do better, you know, like your armored cav, they'd be 100 up and 100 up in melee as well, but those other units, not much in it. So yeah, I think they're just a little bit underpowered. I don't want them to get too strong, and I don't know, maybe 66 or something, maybe a slight drop in price, perhaps that might help. Maybe to about the price of the expert armored horse archers. Perhaps that might be something to consider. But at the moment, I'm going to put them in at number 4. At number 3 on my list, I'm going to go for the Loose Order Warband. The Loose Order Warbands. Now, I was actually having a look through the lists, and they're not that common. Most of the time, a lot of armies, British, Breton, Germanic tribes, they've got the standard close order warband, and the difference is the close order are heavy foot, and the loose order says warriors, but essentially they are medium foot. So this is why they're going in so highly on my top 10 of the worst units, because you're still paying the same price as the close order type, but it's for the medium infantry version, really. So it's the same price. And 58, this is the Dacian 89 BC list, and actually I haven't got any I haven't got any heavy foot here, and maybe that's how it is, you know. Maybe historically they didn't really have any real heavy infantry. It was all kind of loose order, lightly armed, lightly protected troops. These are warriors as well, the Folksmen, but the difference is they're superior quality and they've got a heavy weapon, and they cost 10 less. So they are actually pretty good value for money. But these units, you're fighting, you know, when you're up against the standard heavy infantry, even Sassanid foot, which is only 36, Arab foot 36, those kind of units, yes, they'll get the 110 impact advantage, the 100 for being impact foot, and the 10 for the deep ranks. But once in melee, they're going to struggle, because every time they lose a melee round, they've got additional -1 modifier for being medium foot against heavies. So 58 is quite a lot, and it's also difficult when they are your mainline troops, and a few of the barbarian factions, they are mainline troops. It would be nice, I think, if just to have maybe 3 or 4 close order warbands. It would just it would be a big help for this kind of army. Anyway, they go in third on my list. At number two on my list, I'm going to go for the Roman cavalry stroke armored cavalry, same unit. This unit is 40. I guess you can say it's bona fide cav, pretty good for bulking out your cavalry, because it's in most or many lists, and it can hold. It can hold against better cavalry, but for the price, when you consider, well, Roman lancers for starters, they're only 4 more, and they're lancers, they're excellent value for money, but you don't see them that often. But noble cavalry only costs 4 more, and yet it's 50 up on impact against Roman cavalry, armored cavalry, and 25 up in melee. So noble cavalry at 44 is so much better value than this. Noble lancers, they're only 48, they're only 8 more, and they're 100 up on impact against this cav, and 25 up in melee. So it's not very cost effective. It can crumble. You know, those impacts, 50 up on impact, the noble cav, and the 100 against those lancers, they can easily crumble in one. So you're hoping that this cavalry can hold on impact, and then maybe the 25 down in melee against a lot of cavalry isn't so great. Also, I suppose if you compare the price to some of the more expensive light horse that you see, nomad light horse archers are 40, same price. The fierce type, the fierce nomad light horse archers are 48, which is quite a lot. So, you know, it's not, I guess it's not the worst of the worst in terms of being cost effective, but I still think it's pretty poor Although for the Romans, that's just the way it is. Historically, they didn't have that good cav, I don't think, so mostly relied on their wonderful infantry. So that's fine. I'm not saying to put the price down, especially for the Romans. But overall, on a one-on-one basis, not the greatest cav. At number 1, officially the worst unit in the game in LA. According to me, I'm going to go for the heavy artillery. Maybe some of you guessed that I would put this unit high up in my list, maybe at number 1, and you would be correct. You've got the light artillery. Now, it's just cost, isn't it? I think a lot of it is about cohesion checks. It's not so much about casualties. I just tested actually the heavy artillery out against Warband. I had some Warband units I was shooting at, and with this kind of army, this is an Indian army, and we've got tons and tons of the Indian archers, and that's when it can work quite well, because you force a cohesion check with your skirmisher fire, and then you fire away with this, and hopefully you can disrupt stuff. That is the general idea, I think. So in that sense, light artillery is probably better because it can move around a lot easier, and again, it forces cohesion checks similar to the heavy art. Now, there has been some changes. We must say this. This game is continually being updated. Great from the devs. They're always patching, updating, bringing out new DLCs. And about less than a week ago, in the last week, there's been a patch. And in the latest patch, the difference is that now you can move the heavy artillery 1 square before opening fire. So before, wherever you put it, you couldn't move it, which made it even more useless. But now you can actually at least move around, which makes a big difference. You know, I hardly ever see these units on the battlefield. Similar to wagons, isn't it, really? The wagons were really expensive. They were in the 70s. Was it 75 or so? And the price has come down to mid-50s. And so there's been some alterations there with the wagons. And they've also made some alterations with the heavy art. And that's good. I mean, it's not my favourite unit. I don't want them to dominate the battlefield. It's not about artillery, is it? It's about infantry and cav and skirmishers. But I do support being able to move this unit just 1 square. Well, I mean, 1 square is not a lot anyway, is it? But it just makes it more useful, and it's possible to have some impact on the battlefield. So that is good. That is good. But still, 36. You really need to use this unit in conjunction with skirmishers. So, you know, that's a bit of an outlay, because even 1 or 2 is probably not enough. You probably need 3 or 4 units firing away on a unit and then to fire with this. So it is quite tricky to use. It is quite tricky to use. That's why I'd probably just pay the 24 for light art, which is the same price as javelin horse, isn't it? And javelin men. So generally I'd go for the light artillery. Let's have a look at it actually. Let's compare. This does look a bit more fearsome, and maybe it would be more likely to instill some fear in your enemy rather than this. But overall, I mean, it still causes cohesion checks, which is what you want, really. So that's why I'd always go with light art. But anyway, it is number 1. If you disagree with my choice, or indeed with the list and any of the units that I've placed, please put your comments below. Thanks a lot for watching, and see you again soon.